Good evening. My name is Sarah Edelman. I will be your MC tonight. I was a 2020 Colorado Book Awards finalist in the creative nonfiction category for my book, The Lampblack Blue of Memory, My Mother Echoes, and it is my honor to be here with you guys. On behalf of Colorado Humanities and Center for the Book, I would like to thank the Book Bar for providing such a great venue for the 31st annual Colorado Book Awards finalist reading series. Thank you also to the CB sponsors Unite for Literacy and the Colorado Sun, with whom Colorado Humanities partners on Sunlit's Sunday Experts of Colorado Authors Books. Tonight, I'm pleased to introduce you to two talented writers whose books have been named by Colorado Book Awards selectors as the finalists in the creative nonfiction and general nonfiction categories. Copies of all the finalists' books are available for purchase anytime. You can ask finalists to sign your books, and please enjoy Book Bar's great snacks and drinks during and after the readings. One of the finalists in the creative nonfiction category here tonight is Kathryn Wilder, who will read from her book, Desert Chrome, Water, a Woman, and Wild Horses in the West. Kathryn's work, cited in Best American Essays and nominated for the Pushcart Prize, has appeared in such publications as High Desert Journal, River Teeth, Fourth Genre, Sierra, and other anthologies. A past finalist for the Ellen Malloy Fund Desert Writers Award and the Waterston Desert Writing Prize, Wilder holds an MA from Northern Arizona University and an MFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts. Kathryn lives in Dolores. Kathryn.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Book Bar. Thank you, Colorado Humanities and Center for the Book. I am thrilled to be a finalist. I can't be shy about that. It's a great honor. And I'm just gonna, I haven't read all the other books that are finalists, but excuse me. I just want to say something about Susan Tweet's Bless the Birds, which is also a finalist in creative nonfiction, and it's a really beautiful book. The subtitle is Living with Love in a Time of Dying, and she lets you know right off that her husband has a brain thing that's going on, and she interweaves that story with backstory and information about the kind of cancer. It's a beautiful book. So if you're in the book buying mood, I would highly recommend this one. Okay. And, you know, I guess I kind of also recommend this one. Just saying. So this is mine, Desert Chrome, Water, a Woman, and Wild Horses in the West. And, you know, simply put, it's the story of a woman lost in grief who finds her way out by following mustangs. That woman is me. And I live in Disappointment Valley and Dolores, Colorado, which are in that far southwestern, I don't know if I'm pointing in the right direction, but that far corner of Colorado. Oh, over there? Okay, well, anyway, it's there's, you know, small population, not necessarily where people think of when they think of Colorado, because they know Denver and they know the Front Range and all the beauty of the Rockies and everything. But it's also very beautiful down here in the desert. So I am going to read. If you have questions, store them up and ask me when I finish. I'm just going to read from the prologue at first. It's titled Last Drink. I lead my Gruyere mare, Savannah, to water. She is the gray of a mule deer's winter coat with a dorsal stripe and zebra markings on her legs that trace back to the original wild horses, though she is quarter horse, not Mustang. The Mustang follows. It is his first time here, to the pinyon and juniper woodland that defines my desert home. We walked down the rocky path and around to a flat below the cabin where in the 1930s post and rail sheep pens were built right up against the wall of Dakota sandstone, which forms the back fence of the old pens and the cliff base upon which a modern log cabin sits. Savannah follows me on a loose lead despite thirst. The big, dark bay Mustang, who wears no halter or rope, sticks close to the mare until he smells water and trots up and around and above the creek, missing the trail the cows have made through the coyote willows. 400 years ago, that trail would have been carved by bison and wild horses, and Savannah might be a direct descendant of the horses brought to North America in the 1500s by Spanish conquistadors. I would not be a white woman in her 60s watering her horses in Disappointment Creek, but a young girl nearing a stream that ran cold and clear from the mountains, the rope in my hands, plaited grass. The Mustang comes in close to the mare again, and I quicken my steps, the willows tight here with no place to veer off if the horses crowd me. No longer a young and nimble escaper, I trip over tree roots or rocks or my own boots more often than ever before. As witnessed, I just dropped my glasses, that's how it is. My sons tease me about this, and because I have strong bones, I can laugh too, each time I pick myself up off the ground. Last week, I stepped in a prairie dog hole as I backed up while closing a wire gate. My right leg dropped in clear to the knee, and my boot got stuck. I tried to jerk it out and finally had to yell at Ken, my elder son, to come help me. He trotted across the pasture with the natural grace of a wild horse and yanked me up out of the hole. "Geez, Mom," he said. That was all. The next day, I stepped backward and tripped over a sandstone slab, falling not just on my ass, but all the way down, elbows to the ground, bruises purpling my arms and legs for days. I don't know if you can, Band-Aids from another time. Just don't walk backward, Ken said. You can't step backwards anymore, Mom. Later, I will think about this, about which direction I'm going, but for now, falling is still comedy. I have lived my life outside, on ranches and rivers and the sea. Grateful for strong bones and stubbornness, I still ride and rope and hike and row. I'm not ready to be turned out to pasture just yet, or confined to a space surrounded by walls. But Ken may be right. Stepping back may no longer be appropriate. The horses and I have pushed through the willows and stand on a bank that high water has scoured down to earth and stone. Savannah slides in the mud and dips her nose into a creek that smells of oil shale and spring as it carries snowmelt and silt downstream. The Mustang passes her and splashes in, his feet planted in the current. Both horses drink deeply, despite the tang and sand and salt, water humans can't stomach. And then the Mustang whirls and lunges up the bank on the trail he now knows is there. Savannah and I follow, watching him trot in smooth ripples away, neck arched and body gleaming in the afternoon light as he passes the sheep pens and trots on, sniffing the air. He breaks into a run, flinging his head and bucking, youth and grace and freedom in his bones. Savannah could pull away to follow him, and I would probably fall on the rocks if she did. But today, I am her leader. I want to hug her. If I were that young girl, I would entwine my fingers in her mane and swing up onto her back. Instead, we ascend slowly through rocks and rabbit brush as the Mustang trots ahead, his big bay muscles constricting my heart. Not pain, the ache of love. That's the prologue part of it. So I was lost in grief. I was living in New Mexico and wandering. I moved to New Mexico from Hawaii, which is a little bit of a change, from water to dry. But it didn't quite fit, and so I was kind of lost and not really knowing what to do. There were 3 deaths in our family. My sister's here from Oregon, that's what I'm saying. My 2 fathers died 4 months apart, and my best friend overdosed. And so I really was, how we do when we're in grief, just kind of circling around and not really knowing what to do. And one day, and I drive. I know we're not supposed to, and right now it's so expensive, we don't want to, but that's one way that I kind of can clear my head a little bit. So I was driving up out of New Mexico onto the res in Arizona into southwestern, well, I didn't even really know I was in southwestern Colorado, but there I was, and I took a turn and then took another turn and kept driving, and I came upon a band of Mustangs, of wild horses, and it gives me chicken skin even now. It was just a beautiful thing, and the timing was right, and this was a big dry valley with a lot of buttes and rims and rimrock, and it was pretty dramatic country, but it was the horses that spoke to me. And I come from a background of horses, but I'd been in Hawaii for a long time paddling canoes, so the other pieces of me started coming together. And so I started learning about the Mustangs in Colorado. We have 4 herd management areas. One is Spring Creek Basin herd management area in Disappointment Valley, southwestern Colorado, where I live part-time, back and forth between there and Dolores. And there's Little Book Cliffs and East Douglas or West Douglas Piance and who knows? I can't think of it. San Wash Basin near Craig, Colorado. They're all on the western slope. But I started reading more about Mustangs and what's going on. You've probably heard, and people there's so much controversy in the West. And I think for me it gave me direction. It's like, okay, I need to learn. I'm writing all the time, so. That's just what I came into writing about. And I started going to different places and seeing more and learning more. And one of the big controversies, there are a lot of roundups, helicopter roundups, and removals of Mustangs from their ranges. And then they're taken into short-term holding, and if they're lucky, they get adopted or go to a sanctuary and long-term holding sanctuaries. Doesn't always work that way for them. And there's one of the sort of alternative thinking approaches to managing, which the Bureau of Land Management is responsible for managing the wild horses, is using a fertility control, which is PZP, and it's injected into the mare through a dart, if she's in the wild, through a dart in her rump, and it keeps her from getting pregnant. She still comes into estrus, she still gets bred, everybody's happy, but she doesn't conceive. And so there are fewer, it's not that would be my ultimate choice for these horses, but there are fewer babies on the ground, which means fewer horses get rounded up, fewer horses go into holding, we pay fewer taxpayer dollars. Anyway, so I just started learning more, went through the training, just wanted to know more, and as this is happening, I'm the grief, the cloud of grief I was in is kind of dissipating a little bit, or there's love, there's charge, there's energy that I'm experiencing in other ways after kind of several years of just being in a hole. So in Colorado, most of the Mustangs that get rounded up on our off of these herd management areas go to Canyon City, to the prison there. They're you guys probably know about the prison down there. They go in, and they're in short-term holding there. So I'm just going to read another part. Am I okay? Okay. 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 I'm just going to read I'm going to read another part. Okay. This is from a chapter called In the Pen. After all these months of watching mustangs in the wild, Chrome, this is Chrome, photograph taken out there on the range by my friend TJ Holmes. Chrome and his mares, other bands, young bachelor stallions, the old solo stallions often hidden in the fringes. I know that for the full story, I must see mustangs in captivity. It's time. Purses, cameras, cell phones, and pocket knives locked away in the BLM field office, we get briefed on prison protocol, instructed not to make eye contact and certainly not conversation with the prisoners, and we're loaded into a van and escorted inside. Only inside this part of the prison is actually outside. 80 acres of corrals, barns, arenas, round pens, tack rooms, and offices. While there are men aplenty, from our tour guide, wild horse and burro specialist Fran Ackley, to inmates all around, we are the only women present, and we are here to see horses. Fran stops the van at the outlying pens where the older ladies and gents await sanctuary space, like our human elders waiting to get into assisted living. Ages 7 and up, these mustangs are deemed unadoptable and kept at the outskirts. Orange-clad prisoners drive flatbed trucks weighted down with half-ton alfalfa bales into the pens. As horses crowd around the hay, the pecking order is easy to see. In the wild, the social structure of family bands helps the species survive, like wolf packs. But wolves are predators running to kill, and horses are prey. They run for safety. Within the confines of this prison, some cannot run far enough away, the submissive standing off to the side, while the dominant geldings and mares follow the feed trucks closely. The younger, adoptable mustangs live near the training facilities and main alleyway, horses waiting for someone to fall in love and rescue them. Fran shows us hundreds of mustangs, thousands actually, 2,901, says the handwriting on a blackboard on the office wall. Individual horses stand out as we move between pens of mares and geldings, yearlings and mature horses, beautiful bays, grays, buckskins, duns, roans, pintos, sorrels. With wild manes and searching eyes, they burst into movement, racing across the pens, then settle. Some come close to investigate us as we observe them. There are many in between. Onward to the next pen, our collective hearts heavy. Unlike many of the human inmates, these horses did nothing to earn this fate but be born. We approach another pen. Through the corral fence, we watch young mustangs sparring like boys, rearing and jabbing with their front hooves. At sight of us, they charge away, beautiful in their shaggy winter coats, then trot back, tails and heads high, breath steamy. There are 35 Mustang geldings in the pen, the muscle and fire of youth rippling through them. And in all that movement, I spy him, and I swear he is looking at me. The voices around me fade, people disappear, horses blur. A dozen young geldings crowd the fence. The big bay stands back, watching us, watching me. May I go in? I ask Fran. Sure, he says, trusting that I know something about mustangs. Before he finishes nodding, I'm climbing the fence, careful though to move quietly to find the liquid motion of my human body. Some horses spook anyway, and 35 young, mostly untouched by human horses from the high desert west move through the pen with the power of wild water. I stand in the current, hands up in front of the near horses' faces to slow the flow. Some stop, others pivot away, and a few don't care, crowding me. Behind the near geldings, the big bay reflects my stance, solid yet ready to flee. But I can see his eyes beneath his shaggy forelock, Stillwater pools, calm, inquisitive. His thick coat almost as dark as his black mane and tail. He has a white hind pastern and a white star on his forehead. Around his muzzle and eyes, a soft tan glows, even his eyebrows like a Doberman. But he isn't built sleek like a Doberman and doesn't behave like one. He's built like a quarter horse. Of course he is. I have loved quarter horses since girlhood. He watches as I move among the frisky 3-year-olds, standing his ground warily while allowing my presence. My breath slows, becoming more surface, careful, like breathing underwater. In the presence of power and grace, I remember I can do it. Breathe underwater. Breathe in the bodies of the horses in this pen like a huge Olympic swimming pool. Wild horses. And I quiet my heart to match my breath, match my steps, so as not to startle him, any of them, in the cold of a February day in Colorado, as across the backs of other young geldings, he watches me. I feel his eyes underwater. I am swimming underwater. And step by slow step, I take 3 toward him, and the other geldings part, giving us room. I remove my glove and in slow motion lift my hand toward him, lifting and reaching through air, electric with his brace and breath as he watches me, leaning not away, but toward me. My hand out, relaxed, palm down, submissive yet inquiring. His neck stretches as far from his chest as it can, while his feet stand steady, his nostrils searching the air, tasting for danger, and the Mustang's muzzle and my hand enter a space where everything turns liquid like dance, and we are dancing as he reaches farther and I do too, and he sniffs the back of my wrist. Warm breath and whiskers on my skin. When he tenses, I feel it, see it. His body taut, quivering, not in fear, but with the effort it takes this big animal from the wild flanks of Wyoming to not wheel around and run away, to stay. I lower my hand slowly and take half a step back, take a breath, a moment. His strong chest leans toward me again. Well, again, his feet don't move, and I have forgotten the other horses in the pen and the people outside as my hand lifts and the muscles in his stout body relax as he reaches still farther with his nose. In movement as slow as my heart, my breath, I lift my hand and turn it so my fingers loosely cup and hold the air between us, and as I reach with them toward him, I feel it, feel his soft muzzle with my fingertips. He accepts the touch, his first voluntary human touch, and the warmth of his breath, his spirit, his gentle nature fills me. When I step back and to the side, he moves too, not away, but following me, mirroring my movements. Even with the other geldings intervening, he follows as I step slowly here and there, backward, forward, in the spirit water air bubble that holds us. He has hooked on. From the far side of the fence, TJ says, "He likes you." And I feel a smile rising inside, an internal sun drying up any leftover fear. The Mustang's mana has remained intact, his prowess and spirit, and I have hooked on. I don't know how long we dance, too long, for I'm part of people on tour and we need to move on. I could stay in this pen of Mustangs for the next several hours, all night, but for the cold, TJ would stay too. Watching Mustangs is what she does. Watching wild horses is the best medicine, like watching a river or the flames of a campfire burning low in the night. The calm stays with me, but is tempered with sadness as we drive away from all those horses. In their midst, I felt something either new or very old. We were all children once, or foals trotting freely beside our wild mothers. All those mustangs and men and me were someone before. Who was I before somebody's hands changed how I saw the world? We don't do questions. Oh, okay.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Will you just repeat the question?
Okay, that's somebody asking what happened to that particular Mustang. I went back and took him home. He's at home with the other horses in a big pasture, and he's got his own band. And I mean, he's not the band gelding, but he's part of a band, and he's happy. He's not in the wild, but he's got a good home and someone who loves him very much. Other questions? Yes.
Why are all the management areas in the west, on the western slope?
Well, that's just by chance that they fell into the western slope in Colorado. So in 1971, the Wild and Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act was passed by Congress unanimously. I mean, I don't know what's more important, that it was unanimous or that it passed. Anyway, so at that time they looked at where wild horses were, what areas, and they were, in Oregon, California, Nevada, not Washington State, Utah, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Wyoming, I think there are 10 of the western states. So they kind of took where they were, and they being government, BLM, and evaluated where they were located and water and feed sources and cattle, and they decided where they could sort of entrap the horses. And by that I mean so Spring Creek Basin Herd Management Area, which I live next door to in southwestern Colorado, is 22,000 acres. So it's among the smallest. Like the one in Wyoming where this Mustang I just read about came from is something like 785,000 acres. I mean, they're big and small, and so the horses they're free. I mean, they're wild. Nobody touches them, or we can't intervene. They live wild, but there are fences or natural, like the Rimrock's natural boundaries. They don't have access to Disappointment Creek. They're ponds that are dug, that were previously dug for cattle purposes. So anyway, they get to roam free within 22,000 acres. And then BLM decides how many can live there. And that's what they've done with I think there are 177 herd management areas in the West. Most of them are in Nevada, well, I was going to say the biggest ones are in Nevada, but that's not true because Wyoming has, the huge ones. And in Colorado, I think Sandwash Basin is something like 164,000 acres. So does that sort of answer that? Okay. Any other questions? We have another reader. Yes.
Not knowing your background, is this your first book? And did you know that you were writing a book, or did it start out as something else?
It's not my first book. Long time ago, I published or edited a couple and published a couple of anthologies and children's books, and there are, I don't know, 3 or 4 books, that weren't published, that are, in the drawer, as people say. I knew I was writing this book. Partly I was writing because that saves me if I get into a really despondent, negative, bad place. I write my way out. So as we were going through this loss of our fathers and all of that, I was writing, and I wanted a place to put it. Then I found the Mustangs, and it's like, okay, how do I incorporate all of this, Hawaii and Mustangs and grief and, drug addiction, and, how do I put all this in one pot? And I was accepted into the MFA program at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and I knew that I wanted at least a draft of that book to be my thesis. So I went there with the intention of working on the book, and was able to complete a draft for my thesis. But it's very different from what this turned out to be. And I was just really lucky to find, to come out and work on the manuscript again more and more, and then find a publisher, because that doesn't always happen, as I know well. And it's Torrey House Press, which is in Utah, so it's the only nonprofit press in the Intermountain West. So I was pleased to, be represented by people who really understood the West and the Colorado Plateau. And anyway, yeah. Others? You can always ask more later, I think, but let's give your next person a shot. Okay, thank you.
All right. So I'm going to tell you about the other finalists within this category. Kathryn mentioned Susan J. Twite, who wrote Bless the Birds, Living with Love in a Time of Dying. Unfortunately, she was unable to make it tonight, but here's a brief book description. Susan and her economist-turned-sculptor husband had just settled into their version of a good life when Richard saw thousands of birds one day, harbingers of the brain cancer that would kill him 2 years later. This compelling and intimate memoir chronicles their journey into the end of his life, framed by their final trip together, a 4,000-mile-long delayed honeymoon road trip. Susan's 13 books and hundreds of magazine and newspaper articles have won the Colorado Book Award, the Eddy, for magazine journalism, and Forward Book of the Year. Her commentaries have appeared in the Los Angeles Times, the Denver Post, and on regional public radio. Susan lives in Montrose. The third finalist in creative nonfiction category, Jim Davidson, also could not be here tonight. He wrote The Next Everest, Surviving the Mountain's Deadliest Day and Finding the Resilience to Climb Again, a dramatic account of the deadly earthquake on Everest and a return to reach the summit. The Next Everest portrays the experience of living through the biggest disaster to ever hit the mountain. Davidson uses his background in geology and environmental science to explain how this natural disaster unfolded and why. The seismic threats lurking beneath Nepal are even greater today. Jim is an accomplished high-altitude climber, motivational speaker, and co-author of the New York Times bestseller, The Ledge. Jim lives in Fort Collins. So now we'll hear from one of the finalists in the general nonfiction category. Dave Jilk will read from his book, The Entrepreneur's Weekly Nietzsche, a book of disruptors, that he co-wrote with Brad Feld. Dave is a former serial entrepreneur and startup CEO in information technology. He now writes on entrepreneurship and artificial intelligence and dabbles in poetry and philosophy. Dave lives in Longmont. Brad Feld is an early-stage investor and entrepreneur who is a partner in the venture capital firm at Foundry Group and a co-founder of Techstars. He's written a number of books on entrepreneurship and venture capital, and he lives in Boulder. Dave.
All right, well, thank you. And thank you again to Book Bar for hosting this event. And can tell you how pleased Brad and I are to, and honored to have been named a finalist in this category. Very exciting. And I'm going to tell you first a little bit about the background of this book, because it's a very quirky title, and so it deserves some explanation. So Brad and I are longtime friends. I think we're at 40 years now, and going back to college days. We've started businesses together since we were undergraduates and worked as colleagues and been friends, done a lot of things together of different sorts, as well as been in business together. And this was, trying to think if we've done anything recently, but this is probably our latest collaboration. We wanted to do something different. Brad's book, Venture Deals, is actually kind of the textbook on how to do venture capital financings for both entrepreneurs and actually venture capitalists. And so he's done very well with that book. He's interested in doing a lot of different things and providing different ways of insights into into entrepreneurship to people. My interest in this, I kind of retired from entrepreneurship in 2013, and I wanted to find a way to share some of the things that I had learned during my career. Again, wanting to do that maybe a little bit differently than is traditional. So our goal with the book was inspired by some of the experiences we had in our very first business back in the late 1980s, early 90s. And in that business, we found that certain books helped motivate us. They helped keep us going through difficult times in the business. And it didn't take much. Like if the book did just a few things, you could really, you could make it another week. You could make it to payroll, whatever it was that you were struggling with at that point. And we wanted to offer a book that helped people who are in business, who are starting companies, who are starting high-growth companies, get through those difficult times, as well as to think more deeply about their business. And that's really the center of the book, is trying to get people to think harder. So, you know, Nietzsche has a reputation that precedes him, but what people's experiences are determine what that reputation is. In other words, it varies a lot. It's worth telling a brief story because it connects to Kathryn's book in a very slight way, which is that you may know that Nietzsche essentially had a mental breakdown, and he was, I don't know what you'd call it, he was incapacitated for the last 10 years of his life. In 1889, he was living in Turin, Italy, and he saw I think it was a policeman mistreating his horse. And Nietzsche went over, and he held the horse by the neck and began to weep, and that was when he had his mental breakdown, and that was the last kind of cogent moment that he had. And so if you think that may change some of your views immediately about who Nietzsche was, and he was a complex individual. So the way we structured the book was inspired by Ryan Holiday's Daily Stoic, which is a very popular book. A lot of people have found comfort and a way forward in that through difficult times. Stoicism is a different kind of philosophy. And he had a daily reading that's a page or two, and we decided to do a weekly thing, give people a little time to think about what our lessons are. And each chapter has a Nietzsche quote, an adaptation to 21st century English, an essay that we wrote, and then most of the chapters, not all of them, have an entrepreneur narrative, which has another interpretation of the quote by an entrepreneur that one of us knew. So I've selected a couple of chapters to read, but first I'm going to read a little bit from the foreword, which is by Reid Hoffman. Who some of you may have heard of him. He's a pretty well-known venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. He's the founder of LinkedIn, which almost everybody has their resume on LinkedIn somewhere. And so Reid majored in philosophy in college, so he was an undergraduate philosophy major and ended up starting businesses. As part of his rebellion, Nietzsche philosophized with a hammer. He wanted to destroy the old mindsets that locked people into the past and thus better equip them to embrace the possibility of the new. Nietzsche's desire to shift mindsets is also why he emphasized new styles of argument. Whereas most philosophers would typically open an argument in a classical form or by reviewing a historical great, Nietzsche would lead with an arresting aphorism or a completely new mythological narrative. He was, above all else, a disruptor of pieties and convention. always in search of new and original ways to be contrarian and right, never satisfied with the status quo. This is exactly the kind of mindset entrepreneurs should adopt. This is why a daily practice of philosophy can be the way that an entrepreneur moves from good to great, and why a daily practice of Nietzsche is a great practice of philosophy for entrepreneurs. So the first chapter that I'm going to read excerpts, but a good portion of this chapter called Style. And this is in a subsection of the book called Culture. And so we have about 10 different chapters or 12 different chapters on culture in a startup, in a disruptive, high-growth startup. I'll just remind you that there's going to be a 21st century adaptation of the language that we have in here. All right. Style. Culture is, before all things, the unity of artistic style in every expression of the life of a people. Abundant knowledge and learning, however, are not essential to it, nor are they a sign of its existence. And at a pinch, they might coexist much more harmoniously with the very opposite of culture, with barbarity. That is to say, with a complete lack of style, or with a riotous jumble of all styles. In other words, culture is first and foremost about the unity of artistic style in every aspect of people's lives. Knowledge and learning do not, by themselves, create culture, and they are not essential to it. Knowledge and learning might just as easily be found in an uncivilized society with a complete lack of style or many inconsistent styles. Culture developed its modern meaning in the 19th century as an outgrowth of the nascent field of anthropology. Application of the term to business organizations began in the 1980s, and today, many consider the analysis and active shaping of organizational cultures a central aspect of successful entrepreneurship. While Nietzsche was referring to the culture of nations, his views also apply to business culture. Is it reasonable to think of the employees of a company as a people? They undoubtedly spend more time together and have more interactions with each other than they do with their neighbors or other members of their geographic community. They have a degree of shared purpose that is rare among broader groups. They often have unique terminology and behavioral norms that bind them together while distinguishing them from individuals in other organizations. Artistic style shows up in a business in a variety of ways. The best user interfaces, out-of-box experiences, product designs, and websites incorporate a strong artistic component. The interactions that employees have with customers, vendors, and the general public, in how they answer phones, in how they handle negotiations, and in the style of the Twitter feed, leave a distinctive emotional response. Development of the business as a whole is a creative endeavor that begins with an entrepreneur's vision expressed in a distinctive, concrete fashion. Consider the cultural differences between Apple and IBM. Apple exhibits a clear unity of artistic style, and everything about their products, stores, advertising, and customer interactions exudes this style. This unity is also true of IBM, though the style itself is stodgy and uninspired. Consider companies that do not have a unity of artistic style. What does their brand mean? What do you expect when you interact with them? What kinds of products will they offer in the future? If their culture consists of a jumble of all styles, something important is missing, even if the team members are smart, motivated, and collaborative. In all your thinking about company culture, apply a lens of artistic style and make sure that style is consistent and unified across all the company's activities. Now, one of the reasons I picked this chapter, and I'm going to read a narrative from an entrepreneur, is that the entrepreneur is Tim Enwall, who's a Colorado entrepreneur and actually reasonably well known around the Front Range. And Tim is very, very thoughtful about all aspects of the company and the companies that he's run. And we really appreciated him writing his story. But the reason I picked this particular chapter is it illustrates what we're trying to get readers of the book to do, which is think harder about their assumptions, to question their premises, to look more deeply at what they're doing, and maybe they'll come out to the same place. Maybe they'll disagree with us. Maybe we don't know what'll happen, but the thinking process itself is an important aspect of business. And of course, in the rush of putting out fires, business people, entrepreneurs tend to get lost in all that and forget to think about these things. So this is a great illustration of how Tim read the quote that he was writing about, and well, you'll see a little bit about what happens. When I first, so a narrative from Tim Enwall, head of Misty Robotics. When I first read this quote and essay, I had a strong and negative reaction. In a business, culture is what one hires for, promotes for, and fires for. And brand is what the public sees as the company's essence. A strong culture and a strong brand are crucial to success, and both must be built proactively, but they are distinct. Intentional brand image is driven by a small fraction of the company, and rarely do great brands let just anybody touch the image the public sees. Thus, it's rare for a company to hire, promote, and fire employees because they're not luxurious enough for our luxury brand, or not funny enough for our humorous brand. So the notion that culture is the unity of artistic style of a people was jolting and at odds with my worldview. Then I remembered the crisis at Google related to the public airing of a male employee's memo on their gender diversity efforts. This exposed the notion that despite our best efforts at separate brand building and culture building, the quintessence of the company shines through in myriad ways, imbued by both the internal culture and the external brand. This caused a deeper retrospective on my part into situations from my past. What immediately popped into my mind was the culture of Nest, a company that bought Revolve, a company that I helped build. At Google Nest, I saw up close and personal a riotous jumble of styles. Nest was polished, Google was fluid. Nest disciplined, Google experimental. Nest premium, Google ubiquitous, and so on. The travails of Nest after the acquisition are well documented publicly in many press pieces. Many of these challenges can, in my opinion, be traced back to this disunity of artistic styles, which brazenly cross that boundary between culture and brand. And Tim provides somewhat more detail on his story, but that captures the essence of it. It kind of shows his transition from thinking that this quote was all wrong to, maybe there is something to it. So that's one of the reasons I picked this chapter. And I have one other chapter I can read. This one is called Obsession. The passion which seizes the noble man is a peculiarity without his knowing that it is so. The use of a rare and singular measuring rod, almost a frenzy, the feeling of heat in things that feel cold to all other persons, a divining of values for which scales have not yet been invented, a sacrificing on altars which are consecrated to an unknown God, a bravery without the desire for honor, a self-sufficiency which has superabundance and imparts to men and things. In other words, a noble man has exceptional passion, but does not realize just how unusual it is. He has high standards for success, enthusiasm for things that others find dull, a sense of what will be valuable in the future, intense but unexplained motivations, courage without the need for praise, and the ability to sustain and revel in this intensity without support from others. You may have noticed that this chapter is titled Obsession, but Nietzsche seems to be talking about passion. For several years, Brad has written and spoken about the pitfalls of passion in entrepreneurs, distinguishing it from obsession, which is a quality he looks for. Dictionaries generally speak of passion as a strong emotion, while obsession is a preoccupation of the mind. We have a hunch that Nietzsche is trying to make a similar distinction here. The word obsession did not come into common use until later. Earlier in the text, he says, "What then makes a person noble? Certainly not that he generally follows his passions. There are contemptible passions." It is worth asking yourself whether you are obsessed with your business and the problem it solves for customers, or merely passionate about it. If you intend to disrupt an industry or change the world, you must expect people to see you as crazy, intransigent, and possibly sociopathic. Maybe you are. To sustain yourself and your efforts in such a climate, you must find your drive within. You must know your vision and why it matters to you. Importantly, you cannot feel that its correctness depends on your ability to explain it to others. You must be obsessed. Even after you are successful, do not expect universal praise for your vision and persistence. Be prepared for a lawsuit from someone who thought he had the idea first, or who thought he contributed to your success. Those whose livelihoods are displaced by the disruption will try to make you look heartless. People will criticize your newfound wealth, even as they use and enjoy your products. The transition from disdain to envy and hostility could be quite sudden. Consequently, you must pursue your vision and your business for your own purposes. This does not mean that you should ignore sincere advice. It does mean that you should expect no one to fully understand or have the same level of intensity and intrinsic drive toward the goal you seek. The people who work for you, invest in you, buy from you, most of the enthusiasm they have about your goal will come from you. It can be an immense burden if you do not feel obsessed strongly at the start, if it does not seize you as almost a frenzy. Be ready for it.
Thank you. Any questions?
Questions? No? All righty.
Okay. So I'm going to tell you about the last two finalists that could not be here tonight, but I'll tell you a little bit about their books that are also in the same category. The second finalist, Todd Mitchell, he wrote the book Breakthrough: How to Overcome Doubt, Fear, and Resistance to Be Your Ultimate Creative Self, which aims to expose the toxic success myths that hold people back and to reveal radical perspective-shifting solutions. Through concise, friendly chapters that weave together personal experiences with guidance from research and philosophical traditions, readers are given pragmatic ways to turn potential breakdowns into life-changing breakthroughs. Todd is the author of several award-winning novels for young readers, teens, and adults, including The Last Panther, The Traitor King, The Secret to Lying, and Backwards. His other recent book, The Namer of Spirits, is a middle grade novel that's been optioned for film TV development. Currently, Todd directs the Beginning Creative Writing Teaching Program at Colorado State University and lives in Fort Collins. The third finalist in the general nonfiction category, Julian Rubenstein, also could not be here tonight. He wrote The Holly, 5 Bullets, 1 Gun, and the Struggle to Save an American Neighborhood. Much more than a crime story, this book is a multi-generational saga of race and politics that runs from the civil rights movement to Black Lives Matter, with a cast of billionaires, elected officials, cops, developers, and street kids. The book explores the porous boundaries between a city's elites and its most disadvantaged citizens. Julian is an award-winning Denver-based journalist and the author of Ballard and the Whiskey Robber, a finalist for the Edgar Allan Poe Best Fact Crime Award. His work has appeared in The New Yorker, Rolling Stone, and the New York Times Magazine, as well as in Best American Crime Writing. He is a visiting professor of the practice of documentary journalism at the University of Denver. And with that, thank you to the Book Bar for hosting the reading series. Thank you to Colorado Book Awards entrants, selectors, judges, and volunteers, and to Colorado Humanities and Center for the Book staff. We hope you'll join us at the Ellie Calkins Opera House Studio Loft on June 25th at 4:30 p.m. for the Colorado Book Award finalist celebration and winners announcement, which includes brief readings by the winners and a reception. To secure your tickets or to learn more, please visit coloradohumanities.org. And thank you for coming out to support Colorado writers. We look forward to seeing you all at the next reading and at the celebration.